What we saw over the last 2 weeks were many meetings among UN officials, Dubai officials, and representatives from nearly 200 countries on a variety of issues, including nature, land and ocean ecosystems, what children face, the role of women when it comes to the climate crisis. Essentially, they were conducting what is described as a global stocktake, which essentially is a litmus test, an inventory on the planet since the Paris Accords were signed in 2015. Now, they discovered lots of things which they've included in this GST, which is that we are not on path to achieving our goal of halving greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, or even our net zero goals by 2050. So during these meetings, governments and everyone involved had to come up with their own way forward, decide their own way forward to achieve global targets. But these meetings came under a lot of scrutiny and criticism initially because the COP president, Sultan Al Jaber, invited a record number of fossil fuel executives and lobbyists to the meetings. His justification was that everyone needed to be part of the discussion to effectively forge a way forward and out of this climate crisis. That decision came under a lot of scrutiny simply because the fossil fuel industry has been known to have one goal, and that is to increase their profits, particularly since many countries, many oil-producing countries have plans to expand oil and gas production. So by the end of this COP28, when the wording of the GST basically said that we would try to phase away from fossil fuels, many people were upset because they wanted stronger language, specifically the phasing out of fossil fuels. But that said, there is a so-called consensus on the planet on how we move forward, and countries must now go back and do whatever they can. This is on a voluntary basis, by the way. No one is mandated to reduce greenhouse gases. No one is mandated to contribute funds to the to adaptation and mitigation and the loss and damage funds. This is all on a voluntary basis. So countries have to go back and decide what their plans are to ensure that we halve greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and we achieve our net zero goals by 2050.
For more on this now, let's go to Tom Burke. He is chairs of E3G board and joins me now from London. Thank you very much for joining us to the programme today. Right, so after 2 weeks of COP28, where do we stand in this energy transition process?
Well, I think what's important, right, is that we are at least all facing in the same direction, which we weren't before. And what's happened is every country, all 200 or so countries present, have agreed that the principal threat to keeping the climate safe is the burning of fossil fuels, and that we must now stop doing that. What we haven't agreed is how fast to do that. And clearly, as things currently stand, we're nowhere near fast enough. And as your correspondent pointed out, we should be reducing by the end of this decade. We should have cut our emissions in half, and actually we're going to increase them by almost 10%. So we're way off course.
Interesting, so no agreement on how fast to do it. And how interesting or controversial is it that these oil-producing nations are actually at the centre of this COP28 event, of all these meetings? And how interested are these countries in eventually diversifying away from oil and hydrocarbons?
Well, there are two questions there. I don't think it was really very significant where this COP took place. In a way, it exposed the oil-dependent, the petrostates, if you like, to more pressure because it took place in states who, in a sense, have most to gain by failure. And the fact that it was a success, and I think, put a lot of those fears to bed. Whether now they will actually carry on, as it were, in the path that has been set out, I think that remains to be seen. That there is a real problem for those states, not just the big states in the Middle East, but also some of the smaller African states, for instance, like Nigeria or Angola, about how you replace the revenues from oil and gas as we make the transition to renewables as we go forward. Clearly, for most countries, it is now cheaper to invest in delivering your energy from renewable sources than it is to do it from using fossil fuels. So there's a real challenge ahead for the petrostates about how they adapt, not so much to using renewables, but as to losing the revenues from oil and gas.
That's correct. And some countries have actually successfully managed to diversify away from oil. I'm thinking Dubai, less so Abu Dhabi, less so Saudi Arabia, right? What's the outlook for these countries in terms of energy?
They really are going to have to diversify. In a sense, those particular countries are very well placed in relation to solar energy to produce electricity that we will need if we're going to replace oil and gas. But they really do have to speed up the transition. And as I say, the technology is not really the problem. We have the technology we need to make that transition. The real problem is the economics, what you do for revenues and dividends instead of oil and gas. And that's a problem that is going to, I think, become increasingly important as we go forward.